In the early 1980s, Brazil was in the tight grip of a military dictatorship. But something pretty incredible was happening. On a football pitch, of all places, a team, the Sport Club Corinthians Paulista, was becoming this powerful, totally unlikely symbol in the fight for freedom. This is the story of Corinthians democracy.
I mean, it sounds almost unbelievable, right? A bunch of athletes taking on an authoritarian regime. But trust me, the story behind this question is way more complex and honestly, more inspiring than you could even imagine.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll set the scene in 1980s Brazil. Then we'll dive into how this radical democratic idea even started inside the team, how they put it into practice, and I mean voting on everything, and how they took their politics right onto the pitch. And finally, we'll look at the incredible legacy of their motto, to win or lose, but always with democracy. Okay, so to really get how big of a deal this rebellion was, you first have to understand just what they were pushing back against. Back then, Brazil was under military rule, and this wasn't just some abstract political thing happening somewhere else. That whole authoritarian mindset was perfectly mirrored in how football clubs were run. Management had absolute total control. They treated players less like athletes and more like, well, like property. A perfect example of this control was a practice called concentração. Just imagine this for a second. Before every single game, you get locked in a hotel for up to 2 days. You're completely cut off from your family, from your personal life. This was totally standard, and for the players, it was a huge source of frustration. But out of that intense frustration, something revolutionary started to take shape. A completely new way of thinking was about to be born. It all started with an idea. A group of players, just totally fed up with all the authoritarian rules, decided to fight back. But not with anger, not with violence, but with the very thing the country was missing, democracy. Now, every movement needs its leaders, and this one had a fascinating crew. You had Sócrates, the team's star player, who was also a medical doctor, a cultured midfield maestro. Then there was the determined fullback, Wladimir. And, so crucially, they had the backing of the club's president, Waldemar Pires, who actually gave them the room to try this crazy radical experiment. And this is really the key to the whole thing. The team completely transformed itself. It became a microcosm, like a tiny version of the democratic Brazil that so many people were dreaming of. Inside the club, they basically became what one source called an idealistic but effective political cell, fighting for their own freedom. Look, it's one thing to have a great idea, but how do you actually run a football team as a democracy? Like, day in and day out? The process was revolutionary because it was so simple. The team would just discuss everything that affected them as a group. I'm talking everything from what time they should eat lunch to whether they should get rid of that hated concentration for good. Then they'd vote, a simple show of hands. And here's the real kicker. Everyone's vote was equal. The star player's vote was worth the exact same as the kitman's vote. This became their mantra, their motto, win or lose, but always with democracy. It just perfectly captures their whole philosophy. The process, the freedom, the dignity of just having a voice, that stuff was every bit as important as the final score. And the amazing thing is it actually worked on the pitch. This wasn't just some political statement that was distracting them from the game. Being empowered by this new freedom, they won the state championship back-to-back in 1982 and 1983. They proved that democracy and success could absolutely go hand in hand. So they're winning, they're empowered by their success on the field, and now the movement was ready to take its message beyond the locker room and onto the national stage. This was a huge step. I mean, huge. In 1982, when Brazil was holding its first multi-party elections since the military coup, the Corinthians players walked out onto the pitch with "Vote on the 15th" printed right there on their jerseys. They were using their massive platform to speak directly to the entire nation. You can really see how fast things escalated here. It started with the jerseys in 82, then their championship win in 83 gave them an even bigger platform to stand on. And it all built up to this high-stakes political gamble by their leader, Sócrates, in 1984. And that brings us right to the climax of the Corinthians democracy movement and the powerful, powerful legacy it left behind. So, in 1984, the Brazilian Congress was voting on an amendment to bring back direct presidential elections. Sócrates made a public promise. If the amendment passed, he would turn down a huge offer from an Italian club and stay in Brazil. But if it failed, he would leave. He was literally tying his entire football career to the democratic fate of his country.
Well, the amendment didn't pass. It was defeated. And true to his word, Socrates left for Italy. It was a massive blow, and in a lot of ways, it really marked the end of the movement's most visible phase. But to see this as a failure is to completely miss the point. The movement, which was brilliantly named Democracia Corintiana, had a massive impact. It was supported by famous artists and intellectuals. It even rattled the government so much that the head of the Sports Confederation officially warned the club to stop interfering in politics. I mean, that's proof right there they were seen as a genuine threat.
The story of Corinthians' democracy really shows us that sometimes a football pitch can be a practice field for revolution, a platform for protest, and a real symbol of hope. It makes you ask the question, when is a game more than just a game?